Hello, Anthony.
Hey, Ricken. How's it
How's it
going?
going? Anthony and I studied together at the University of Pittsburgh as electrical engineers. I think you were like a year or two below me, but a year below
Yeah.
me. Yeah, a year
Yeah,
below
one
me.
year. We still have a lot of
Well,
overlap.
I also took an extra year because I
Ooh,
decided to do electrical a little bit later. But
so did
yeah,
I.
those classes are fun. I just for some reason I just remember signals a lot,
I
and
knew it. I knew
I feel like
I
everybody
knew.
remembers. I don't want to
What
get
was
too
his
technical here, but any electrical engineers or even bioengineers out there will probably relate to
signals and
remembering,
systems?
yeah,
Yeah. And what
signals.
was it? Wasn't his what was his name, Professor? Was it Al Jamudi, I think?
Al-Jamudi, yeah, exactly.
Um
He was good. He
he
was good, yeah.
he was awesome. He was a
Yeah, he
great
was awesome.
professor. He was very dopey and I really liked him. He was
Yeah.
very cool, very smart.
I just
Um
remember him using the phrase "lo and behold" like every 5 minutes. Every time I see that when I'm reading, or like anytime that I just think of him instantly, every time.
really?
Yeah,
Oh,
like
wow.
because of that phrase, because he
That
used
has
it so
never
much.
I don't remember lo and behold, but I remember we had just taken an exam and you and I were like, it was that like post exam, like absolute chaos where
Yeah,
everyone's trying to figure out, like, did I bomb it or did I pass? Like,
yeah.
all relative to each other, which you know you shouldn't do. And you and I had a lot of similar responses to one another. We were like, yes, yes, that's exactly what I did. And it was so rewarding. And I'm pretty sure like one of my answers, at least, maybe not yours, I think I made like an absolutely terrible mistake on that exam. And he still was very lenient and was like, you made all the right choices for the big mistake you made in the very beginning of this analysis. So I'll give it to you. And
Oh
I was like,
man.
wow, what a kind guy. But
Yeah.
also, I was like, what an absolute idiot I was coming
Yeah.
out of that exam, being like, yes, I did the same thing. And I made all those mistakes.
Well, I guess that was like a decent introduction, but do you want to just give yourself
Yeah, I guess like
chance to
I'm
talk about a little bit about your quickly what from Pitt and what you did after that and where you are now
yeah.
quickly, and then we can go into more detail.
Sure. So for people listening, which is weird because I'm so focused on talking to you, I
And
forget that
this,
like
it's
this
okay.
is for
This isn't
us.
even live, so no one's actually listening, but hopefully
Yeah,
people
yeah,
will listen once they watch the recording.
cool. Yeah. So I just for people listening, I have a formal background in electrical engineering, similar to Ricken. I went to Pitt. We graduated from undergrad in
I
2016. I
I
took mine in
graduated
16.
15. You were probably
Yeah,
16, right?
16.
Yeah.
So after that, I worked as a biology lab technician for about 6 months part time just to get a job out of school. And that was like an kind of like a historical job I had been holding. And that was like just like, hey, like I developed an application for that lab while I was there. The PI was really cool. We had a really great relationship. So I worked there while looking for work and like developed a job application because we had learned some programming in EE. You know, it was like
Yeah.
Java, C++, MATLAB. So after that, I ended up becoming a CT field engineer for a while. So I would drive around like the tri-state area, just like pretty much around like it was like a triangular region of 1,100 square miles between Allentown, Philadelphia,
Yeah.
Jersey, and some places Delaware. And I would do maintenance and installations for CAT scanners, computed tomography
Mm.
scanners, as a field engineer.
How
And
much how much driving was that?
it was a lot. It was a lot
Yeah.
of driving. And also like the hours were very odd. Like
Yeah.
I would be on call once a month for a full week after, like, and that would be after I worked. So like 8 to 5,
Yeah.
I'd be on the clock, and then 5 to midnight, I'd be on the clock for 1 week on call. So I would end up, like one time I had to go to Camden at like 9 p.m. Just
Oh
to like work
wow.
on a CT scanner. And
Oh
then
my
like,
god.
one day I remember specifically, I think I worked like maybe like 11 or 12 hours like straight because a CT
Yeah.
went down.
Were you going to like hospitals, or where were you going? Yeah.
I was going to hospitals and medical centers. So I
Yeah.
worked in different hospitals in the greater Philadelphia region. So some of them could be busy, busy, and some of them were like, quiet.
Yeah.
It was a super interesting job. The work was incredibly rewarding, but I knew down the line that even though it was interesting, I was going to burn out.
Yeah.
So I tried to like take care of myself and figure out what to do. So I ended up transitioning into some office work as an applications engineer. And I did that for about 2 years. and I worked in specialized electronics, just doing dedicated technical support. So I handled a web chat, phone, and email on my own for all of these questions that would come in about these like just like really specific types of sensors. It's like not stuff you'd come across like in everyday life. They were tilt and vacuum sensors, and not
Okay.
vacuum in the sense of like I need to clean my house. It
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
vacuum like in terms of pressure.
Industrial. Yeah.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah.
So I did that for a minute, and then I had decided, I decided that I kind of wanted to pivot out of that for a while, which leads into the data engineering thing. So I think, if there are other questions we want to get to first, that's a bit of my background, and that sets the stage for data, but I'll
That's the
hold
stage
off.
for Anthony, the data engineer,
The
but
data
we can,
engineer.
yeah, we can talk about that.
Cool.
No, that's awesome. What did you quickly, I mean, I definitely want to jump into, data and jobs and stuff, but what did you like and not like about what up until those two jobs that you mentioned up
In
until
those
your
two
journey when
jobs.
you decided to make,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, the CT work was, I can't stress enough like how fulfilling it really
yeah,
was. It was just the hours.
yeah,
I was like, I feel like, yeah, because I do like some regularity in my schedule. I mean, who, I guess some people don't. So for me, I was just like, I will burn out, and I can see that like I don't have a lot of control. It feels like I don't have control over my schedule, because even when I wasn't on call, I had this one really interesting job where an X-ray tube had failed in the
mhm,
CT scanner, which is it's a big repair.
yeah,
And I don't know if you remember this from our school days, but I'm a bit particular about like getting certain things accomplished, or knowing exactly that
yeah,
everything is working exactly as it needs to. So I think that's, in one way, I might be a bit of a quintessential engineer.
yeah,
I really wanted to do my job as best I could, but sometimes testing on those machines could take, if you're going to do it right, it's going to take hours.
yeah.
And so I ended up working like a 13-hour day
Oh wow,
without having any control over my schedule. It
right,
just it just was the way it was. So I was like, this for me it's not gonna work long term. And
yeah,
I'm glad I could do something physical. I thought that was very cool. But I
yeah,
knew long term, I was like, I think I just want something a bit more analytical. I think, if I'm being honest with myself.
of course,
So I moved into the desk job, and I think there were a couple of things about that position that just didn't necessarily resonate with me.
yeah,
Um, but I feel like there was something about maybe being connected to it that I felt I lacked. Like I didn't feel
yeah,
connected to the work. Um, and yeah, I wasn't sold on the type of work I was doing. Let's say that,
yeah,
let's put it that way. So that's kind of what pushed me into like, I think I need to pivot someplace else. And interestingly enough, really actually what that last job pushed me out of was engineering altogether. I actually sought to be a community organizer, and was
yeah.
actually thinking of becoming a paralegal and maybe going to
Oh
law
wow,
school.
wow,
So that job for me, I thought what it was teaching me was that engineering as a whole wasn't for me. And I
yeah,
was like, if this is what engineering is, I don't think it's for me.
yeah,
And it's interesting that we're having this conversation, because I ended up switching,
yeah,
not into a new field, but into a new type of engineering that I
yeah.
realized was precisely what was
You
right for me.
wanted, yeah.
So it's like
Interesting. Yeah.
that work. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And we'll talk about what you're doing now, but that's crazy because I feel like I kind of had a similar experience, even though mine was still, I think yours was a little bit more, I don't want to call it drastic, but like,
Hmm.
you were doing more field work than I've ever done. Like I haven't done
Hmm.
any. I haven't driven around or gone to
It's not
hospitals
common.
or whatever,
Yeah.
but it's all engineering work at the end of the day, and at least what you were doing and
Hmm.
what I was doing, and I can kind of relate to it. It's not, when I was at NetApp,
Hmm.
we were for my internships at Pitt, we were doing a lot of like, I mean, it was an internship, so it wasn't like the most, I don't know, it wasn't like the most real experience. Like you really need to work full time long term to really realize
Yeah.
what the job is like, but I still had a good experience. But like even there, that was the most field work, so to say, like hardware work, where I wasn't sitting at my computer and like coding or doing analytics. I
Hmm.
wasn't working with people as much, solving, client problems, which is what I do a lot now. But then I was, fixing, doing maintenance on their servers. And I was like,
Yeah.
a lot of this is like hardware engineering work, but a lot of it isn't. And like, I don't want to be
Mhm.
doing this. A lot of us want that like desk job where we still get to interact with people. We get to do, cool, like work on the computer. At least for me, I wanted to
Mhm.
switch to like more software work, if you can call it that.
Yeah.
So can definitely relate to that. That's super interesting. I do think about that a lot. I'm like, how many, because like my dad is like, he's doing a lot of project management work, but he worked in factories like his whole life. Like my mom was like always annoyed because he had to go in on weekends to the plant, to the factory, and like,
Yep.
supervise all these workers. And he's done that forever. He's a great engineer. He
Mhm.
truly loves it. But I was like, I will never love like a factory engineer job like this. Okay, so I kind of want to, this is actually a perfect segue into talking about your cool projects and like the community work or
Yeah.
exploration that you did.
Mhm.
So what made you, as you were thinking about this switch, or as you were
Yeah.
going through the motions, what kind of pushed you to, what piqued your interest in the data field, whether it be data science, data engineering, how did you make that switch? I think that would be super exciting to hear.
Yeah. So the thoughts of engineering not really being for me happened during my desk job. I ended up losing my job right at the onset of the pandemic.
Yep.
So I had been finding myself like at the same time, like in the 6 months prior to to losing my job, I had been starting community organizing a lot. I had been, like organizing around climate justice, and I helped, this one city council campaign, which was like a historic win in the city of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I helped basically just like canvas and go door to door and make phone calls to get people to get out and vote for. And then the now city council person in Philadelphia, Kendra Brooks. And it was a really big deal because city council's structure in Philly is actually super interesting. The majority party gets the majority of seats on council, but there's always 2 seats that are reserved for the minority party. Kendra was not running as a Republican or a Democrat. She was running in the Working Families Party. And
Yeah.
so I had gotten involved in that. And so I was learning a lot as a community organizer. I was meeting a lot of people. And then I was actually asked at the end of the year to help lead the organization, help lead the local chapter of the organization here in
Okay.
Philly. I'd been finding that there was so much about it that I thought was so important. I'd been learning about like climate change. I'd been reading a couple of books about it, and I was feeling very empowered to like get involved. I was like, there's so much that we could do that people don't really think about. And it's not even necessarily associated with climate change. People always think, oh, big picture, I can't really do much. It's like actually so many different things that are parts of our lives, whether it's like, the capitalistic way our nation operates, or, things associated with race or gender, all kind of tie in. All these different issues that we experience are tied into each other at some point. They're all
Right.
interwoven. So I was learning so much about how like even economic justice and housing justice are associated with climate justice. So I'd felt so connected to it that when I ended up losing my job, I was like, you know what? I didn't really think that engineering was even for me. So I'm just going to
Yeah.
go all the way in on this. And that's what I did for like literally, oh man, it was like nonstop. Because also in the year 2020, remember, so
Yeah.
the election was happening, which means we were like super involved in all the
Right.
election stuff.
What a year.
And it was, yeah,
Perfect.
it
Actually, in a way,
was.
a fitting year to do all what you did, to make this, to explore, switch out of your like day job.
Precisely. So by accident, I ended up doing, it's almost like I did a condensed version of the exploration at a much heightened rate. So like I learned so much more, much faster. And so what would have taken me a couple of years to maybe realize, because I was only focused on that for a year, I learned it so much faster. So while I was organizing, I was very focused on like all these things people call soft skills, like interpersonal skills, and, learning about people's identities, and, trying to understand how to navigate the community organizing space, because there are tons of groups trying to do a lot of good.
Was the chapter or community group, were they focused on climate?
The focus of the organization is to basically motivate people. It was motivating young people to vote and to get more involved in climate justice. Folks from like anywhere from like, 10 to 30.
Are they just in Philly? totally. But they're all around they're not just
No, it's a national
national
organization.
organization.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So
what is it called? I'm just like
the
doing like a
name,
plug for your,
yeah, yeah,
if
yeah,
there's
it's
people
the
trying to volunteer or get involved, which I might personally look it up because I'm super interested in climate change
Yeah,
and
so it's the
science. So
Sunrise Movement. The
okay.
Sunrise Movement was
Sunrise
actually
movement,
pretty
that's right.
prominent in also getting, we had a very big impact in the primaries during 2020. Lots of people who were seeking candidacy for president. They had those, I don't know if people know about this, but like CNN did like a public forum
Yeah.
on like eight to nine or 10 different topics. And in the climate topic, which is now getting more and more attention,
Yeah.
tons of candidates in the presidential race were like mentioning Sunrise. So the impact was pretty intense, but on a local scale for me, it was just trying to get people involved, bring people into the organization. And our big theory of change was that like the goal was to institute the Green New Deal, which is this like sweeping change where we like kind of like restructure the infrastructure of the US to focus on giving people good jobs that we call clean, right? That don't have like a massive carbon footprint. And those jobs are focused on kind of reinvesting in the United States, whether it's, from an energy perspective, from like a care work perspective, right? Like there's so many things about what we don't do domestically, that are contributing to the problems that we have. So it was about pushing the narrative on the Green New Deal, and also, getting people behind the idea that like, we can create like good, clean jobs for everyone at scale. And we can also help curb climate change in the process. To get to the data engineering thing, while I was organizing, I actually came across a documentary called Coded Bias. And it's on, I think it's still on Netflix, but it was basically about, she's now a doctor. I think she has her PhD. She does have a PhD. Her first name is Joy, but I'm misremembering her last name. She was an MIT student doing work on AI and facial recognition, and she is a Black woman. And she recognized that while she was doing this project, that when using a certain type of software for the project, it wouldn't actually recognize her face unless she put a white mask on her face.
I remember, reading about that.
Huge problem. Like in terms of the people who developed that product, it's like, that should be a glaring red flag to you about how that software was developed. So I was watching this, I was like, I learned about like data justice, about the idea that like there is tons of data being used at scale, globally, and all this data is being collected about people all the time. We have artificial intelligence algorithms being developed to, say whether or not you should get a loan, right? Like their algorithms are becoming like a deep part of the way we operate. And so my thought was like, if we don't, if we're not really handling our cultural problems between humans, we're basically going to reinstitute them in the technology we develop going forward. So I knew when I was organizing, I could feel that I was lacking something. I was like, something is missing. And what I realized, it was the technical and analytical side of who I am, which
it's in your blood.
Thought was there.
It's in your blood. You didn't think it was there, but blood is blood.
Blood is blood. You're right. And I had been ignoring it. And after like my experiences, just like thinking engineering wasn't for me, I was like, I think there's a way for me to synthesize what I care about, culturally and societally with what I know I find joy in doing every day. And I came across a data bootcamp with the University of Pennsylvania. And I was like, what if I decided to double down on, things I care about, but also decided to apply it to something I know I could do every day. And I do it with the undertone of, I want to get involved in data from the aspect of social justice. So that is how I ended up getting into data.
I was going to say, that's amazing. I feel like it was your medical device hospital job, the CT scanning job, made you realize what you didn't want to do. And then weirdly enough, even though it was still like out in the field in a way, like the community work that you were doing made you realize what you want to do ultimately, but just in a, in an office.
And I think there's something about leveraging, even like being able to talk about data to people who might, like, because people aren't getting taught anything about data. People don't know anything.
I mean, data literacy is starting to become a big thing. This nonprofit that I actually work for, do like help them out. It's called AI for Anyone. I put stuff about it on social media, but we did a bunch of workshops over the last couple of years, and they did a bias in AI workshop, which I think you would love.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that they literally talk about that MIT example where she, I
Mhm.
think she put like a mask or something on her face, and
Yeah, I mean, she testified in front of Congress about
yeah,
like some of
right,
the biggest issues in
yeah,
big
and
tech. And
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. So that
she's a
is
real one.
data literacy, bias in AI. All these are becoming such hot topics. And a lot of
Mhm.
this is making me realize that, like, I do think the way technology is going and how AI is involved in everything these days, from like our daily lives to like anything that's like long term, any machinery, any like research, we do need to
Mhm.
have this kind of, at least like have this kind of knowledge and this kind of like literacy be out there as early
Mhm.
as we can. Because, and I
Yeah.
also love like getting college kids or like high school kids involved, because it's early for them, and the earlier they know, some of them we might be able, some of them might even get pulled into the field, but even if they don't, at least they know about technology, they know about AI, and they know about both the pros and the cons. And I think that's super important.
Yeah, I think AI, like if you're an engineer, at least particularly, I think like one of the drawbacks I think to engineering as an entity is that like everyone's like, oh, like just create, like innovate, like make
Yeah,
new. And it's like that is amazing,
yeah,
right? But like it is fundamentally an issue if you don't think about the social impact of
right.
what you're going to build. I don't know if you knew this, but like when I was at Pitt, my one of my final projects in a writing class, like I basically petitioned to change the way we do the engineering program at Pitt.
Nice.
I basically said that
Yeah,
it was kind of like an educational misstep the way they have the social sciences and arts structured.
yeah,
And this is, I think this is very common in engineering schools. So like also no shade at the University of Pittsburgh. I love Pitt. Like I went there,
yeah.
got my degree from there.
But
But
like every school
I
would probably be,
wanted,
yeah, guilty of
yeah,
this.
I also wanted to see students advance in a way that was more fulfilling to them. So like I thought that the most fulfilling thing for me at least was if I was able to choose one subject, that I could just dive deep into, that was a social science or a liberal art, and I couldn't only just do two classes in it and then have to do other ones to fulfill
Right.
requirements. Like I thought that was messy because I think the most innovative thing, the most like the way we are going to become the most innovative is by actually fundamentally combining social sciences, liberal arts, and engineering. And I do feel like creating AI is really cool if you're an engineer, but also AI can be really harmful. So there are these drawbacks. And so that's kind of really what pushed me into getting involved in data and like really building myself as a data engineer and data scientist.
Growing up and even still now, like every kid thinks about or watches like a movie or comes across something that's like robots are going to take over. And I
Right.
actually always thought that that's been a metaphor for like the drawbacks, the bad side of AI and technology.
Mm-hmm.
Like real life isn't as dramatic that like we'll build robots and they'll just take over, but like slowly,
Right.
if we don't pay attention to all these like, these like big examples that we've come across, like the bias example that we talked about, AI gone wrong, and like the social impacts of technology, I think that over time, that's really what it relates to ultimately for me. So data bootcamp, like what did you learn? What were some of the skills that you
Yeah.
picked up?
Just in terms of like accessibility, I do think that like the boot camps are definitely a good way to learn the
Yeah.
skill sets. There were quite a number of people who did not start out with a technical background who pivoted
Yep.
into data. Inevitably, I think there's one important disclaimer to put out there about this is that like it's time consuming and it will be hard.
Yeah.
Like part of the reason that like I was able to do particularly well was because I had some programming knowledge already. And I had a natural, I can't believe I never listened to it when I was an undergrad. I had a natural desire to do it.
Yeah.
Like I find it so rewarding. I find it so interesting to program all day long. Like I'm really vibing with the work from home thing.
I know. Same.
But I think I noticed there were people who were really pivoting. Like some folks were coming from business, some were coming from education. I particularly was I had like the utmost admiration for a woman in my class who was a mom, and she would literally be holding her child while answering questions. She had multiple kids. And
Yeah.
so she would be like, and she was always on top of it, like always. She like knew all her stuff right away. And like she was making the pivot and she was pushing like to get it done. And I was like,
He
good
was
for
from
you.
a non-technical background.
I believe so.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah. It was awesome. I think her name was LaShonda. And she just like, she would answer her questions and immediately go on mute because like her kids were also like, they were kids. So, and we're all working from home. So like, it was just, to me, it also spoke to like the ability or opportunity people have to make the pivot into data through these boot camps. And also for folks who are interested, like when we're coming out of the climate justice and organizing thing, you wonder what impact you'll have. And it kind of goes to what you were talking about earlier. Do people even really care? Because of a project I had worked on, and because of how vocal I would be sometimes, I motivated one person to join the organization I was a part of. And another person was like, I'd always been blissfully unaware of climate change and didn't really care. But working on this project with you made me realize like, wow, there's like actually a lot we can do. So you can have an impact. You just have to find your bag. You have to figure out where you sit. It was basically learning like end-to-end data projects. So for folks listening, like what that means is you have the source of your data, whether it's the output from an application or an application is storing information, names, financial information, maybe demographic info. That's your data source. And then you have to take that data out somehow by writing a program of some kind or making a connection to it. You can
Were you
either
using Python for that, or what did you?
Yeah, so typically it would be using Python. It could be
Do
using
they go
JavaScript.
over? Do they or JavaScript? Do they go over those? Like, what if I don't know Python and I'm starting the boot camp?
Yeah, the subject it was highly technical. So like we
Okay.
started in, so I guess that was just me saying high level. Like you take the
Yeah.
information, you manipulate the information, and you load it to wherever you
Yeah.
want. So like ETL, the extract,
Okay.
transform, load process. But in the bootcamp,
Yeah.
um, it was like we started with Excel
Okay.
like as a tool, and like I could see how they were trying to teach people. So you start with Excel and you learn how to do a pivot table, and you
Nice.
learn how to make like a complicated pivot table using like some basic data.
Yeah.
And then after you've done that, you actually, the way they introduce object oriented programming was through VBA. So through
Okay.
Visual Basic.
Yep.
So we had an Excel file that would be really annoying to do all this stuff manually. So you had to use VBA
Yeah.
to make it work. So that was how they introduced programming. And then I would say the primary focus of the course from then on was in Python, JavaScript, and SQL. Those were the three programming languages that were the most prominent to me, and Tableau.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. I mean, that's more than what you need to get your first job. So one thing that I really liked that I don't know, I think to whoever's like looking for boot camps, I like that it's very practical. Like you're kind of applying
Mhm.
something immediately on a project. And it seemed like you did multiple projects through the course of the boot camp,
Yeah.
which I think is super awesome. Rather than some boot camps, I think they just like it's like being in school where you're just doing, you have like homework
Yeah.
and then you just do like a project at the end. Affordability wise, a lot of times that question comes up. Like a lot of people want to do
Yeah.
boot camps. If they're very technical, they already have those skills. I'm like, do you really want to spend like this much money rather than you can just brush up on these skills and start interviewing, start pivot into. But I do understand, especially if someone's like very non-traditional, doesn't know programming, I feel like they need something like a boot camp. You don't have to, I'm not asking like how much your boot camp costs, but like affordability wise, what were your thoughts on your boot camp or just like in general? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's valid, right? Like
Yeah.
you do have to think about the cost of things. Like you have to weigh cost benefit for yourself, and you also have to think
Right.
about where you're at in life to be able
Yeah.
to pay for something like that. And I would also say like it's really important for you to scrutinize like payment when it comes to boot camps, because some are private and like some are through schools. So it's like a lot of boot camps will also say, we'll get you a job.
Yeah.
Read as many reviews as you can about that boot camp, because they could also just be hiring people to work in their company as a teacher or something like that. And that's why they're able to say, we hire, people get hired. It's because they're hiring them, to work in it. So you do have to be careful, because there are some duds out there that like aren't really trying, and there are some great ones. But when it comes to affordability, I did take out like a small loan to like afford my program. But that was my choice, because I was like, I'm dedicated to this, and win, lose or draw, I am in this field for the next like 4 or 5 years, because I'm making sure I pay off that loan. Penn had a rock solid, there was like one loan option that was like really great. And I was like, this I can do, I know my circumstances, I can handle this, and I'm willing to commit to this. So I would say it was probably on like Mm, I'm sure some could be way more expensive, but I'm willing to say like mine was like probably on the more relatively expensive side. Like, if you
Yeah.
already have debt, if you already have a loan that you have to pay off, like you probably have to pay, take out another one for this one
Do that
too.
first and then,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, but
Um,
I do know that there are some out there that are, I think for particularly for marginalized folks, it's important, like, based on your identity, if you can look for programs that
yeah.
are meant to, I've heard of programs that are specifically for folks of color that I don't
Yep.
necessarily think have a cost associated with them.
Okay.
Some have an apprenticeship built
Yep.
into them, which can help you get a job coming out of it. So that's really important to look out for
Yep.
as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do think ultimately it really depends on the person, there's so many factors, I feel like. I think one thing that you touched on is like a lot of boot camps say that you'll get a job at the end of this, but I've more often than not, even with like really, I'm not going to take any names, but even with really well-known boot camps in like New York City and San Francisco,
I
most
know.
people I talk to don't end up getting a job through the boot camp. A lot of that is like on their own. That doesn't mean they're not good boot camps. I think they're really good. They give you the skills, they give you everything. I just think either they could be more honest about career counseling, whatever you want to call it.
It can also feel a bit predatory, right? In a
Yeah,
way, like
right.
because if you're not really necessarily aware of the fine print and you're
Yeah,
you're being told you can make the pivot and you can do this and you find yourself tied into a contract, like that can be really scary. I think the best advice I can give is that look for a boot camp if you're going to put the money behind it, right? Like if,
yeah,
if you are going to take out a loan, if you're going to pay a lot of money for this, find someone to talk to, whether it's through this podcast or through
yeah,
another avenue you have, to confirm the skills that you're going to get
yeah,
are valuable for where you think you're going. Make sure the program is helping you build a portfolio,
yeah,
like whether it's on GitHub or GitLab or something like that, where you are going to walk out of that program with a portfolio you can manipulate and
yep,
demonstrate to a potential employer, because that matters more than you think it does. Like, there's a lot of people saying resumes matter. I just spoke to someone. I was trying to get my friend some advice about like finding a job in the field. And I know a really higher up person at like a company here in Philly. And I was like, what do you look for? And
yeah,
he was like, portfolio. He's like, I don't care where you come from. I don't care if you have a
yep,
degree. I don't care if you have a boot camp. If it's degree versus boot camp, I'm looking at you the same. What I'm looking for is that portfolio. Do
yeah,
you have code, legible code that like matters? So I
yeah,
think that's what you should be looking for there. And three, if it's going to be a boot camp that is private, that's not through an institution, like it's just like kind of its own company. This could be my own bias, but like scrutinize that a bit more.
yeah,
Like make sure that like they're not gonna tie you down, or maybe like the way they make their money, if it's like a super cheap boot camp, is by taking a portion of your salary coming out of that camp. Because I'm also pretty sure I've seen that. So just dot your I's and cross your T's when you're about to sign up for a private boot camp, and even with the even with the school too,
yeah,
because it's just like my heart goes out to people who like really want to change, really want to pivot, and then they
yeah,
find themselves tied down, having made a mistake they didn't even know was possible
yeah.
because of all the good advertising that people do.
That's super helpful. I think people need to hear that more as they're, considering boot camps. That's a perfect segue into our last sort of thing I wanted to touch on, which is
Sure.
how do you go about the job search? What were the things that you considered? What were obstacles, challenges?
We The way our program worked was it wrapped up in August of 2021. We had career services integrated into our program. So I would say if there are going to be career services, also ask what's available through this career
Yeah.
services, FYI to people listening. We had access to like a network, to some opportunities, to like a job board. And then we also had a career coach. At the end of our course, we did a project. We actually did a machine learning project. We tried to predict if a county's CO2 emissions were going to be above or below an acceptable level, based on what people would typically say were unassociated demographics like race, income,
Yeah.
household size, all that kind of stuff. Because our group fundamentally believed that different types of justice were associated with climate justice. So we gave that presentation at the end of class, and then we were allowed to give the presentation at something called Demo Day, which was like basically you demonstrate your software project to potential employers. They come and sit with you and talk to you. I ended up in a room of like one of like the four people that came that night. But someone happened to pass through who thought the work we did was absolutely like awesome, was really impressed by all of the data manipulation we did. And for me, I had been I had my hands in so many different parts of that project that I was able to speak about it like ad nauseum. And it was like a 6-month long project because we actually built each level of our final project on how we started, and we just like kept evolving it, and it really became super cool. So he was really impressed. And I did 4 interviews. I did one with him and 2 other people I'd be interfacing with. The first one was like an HR screening.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. And I was hired as data engineer.
I think you were telling me that you had, maybe it was another interview process parallel to this, where I think they deducted points for something you did. It was was it an Excel, or you were telling me something in this job process where they
It might
deducted
have been.
for presentation or something, like a take home presentation that you did for a job.
Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God. Yes. I completely forgot about that. Wow.
That's
Yeah.
a good
So
thing. And sorry to remind you, but
just trying to re-traumatize
but I
me.
just
Really,
thought it
that
would
was
be
what
good
this
to
whole
talk about.
during my boot camp last year. So I had actually come across a job that was super relevant to what I wanted to do. If you don't have to take a technical interview, odds are they'll ask you to do a take-home project. Well, they'll ask you to solve a problem, and then what you'll do is you'll take like a couple of days to try to solve the project using the scripting abilities you have that you're learning in your bootcamp. So what I had been tasked to do was like pull in some data. And then, there were some issues in it with like the names being the wrong format. And like, it was just like, oh, I was like, this is exactly what you learn in a data bootcamp.
Yeah.
Like, I feel good about this. I'm ready. I threw myself at it, and I was just like, bop, 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 like moving through it. And I was comfortable because I was in the comfort of my own home, not worried about the pressure. And they wanted you to document what your script did.
Yeah.
So I remember that one of the primary things I had been docked for, this is going to get into the weeds. So I don't know if like you want this to be,
no,
is
just
that okay for your viewers?
Yeah, go with the flow.
For your listeners.
For my viewers, for my not lack of live audience.
Right. For the people who are watching their phones right now.
Watching this in the future.
Yeah. So I had wrote my script in Python. I had used a library known as Pandas. It's a really well-known library for doing data manipulation. And I had wrote comments over all of the script. Like I didn't overdo it. Like I know myself well enough to know, like I did not write comments. It was like, well put together statements and I was given props for my commenting.
Yeah.
What they held against me was the literal way I did the comments. They were like, we actually do comment strings, not just commenting out using like the pound sign, which is like normally how you institute a comment in Python. And I was like, huh? I was like, is this what I have to
the best? That's the most like appropriate reaction.
I was just like, wait a second. And I was like, because and I'm just getting into the field, and I was like, am I going to have to worry about this? I was like, I'm going to go clinically insane if I have to worry about something.
I can't believe, and I remember this because when you told me, I was like, what? Like, I was like, you know what? Maybe don't work for this company, even if you get the job.
Yeah.
There's 2 things. One is that's not at least in all the software engineers that I've interacted with, I work with like a team of 6 and like pure, like hardcore data engineers. And I've seen their code. I've done code reviews for them, even though I'm not a coding person anymore, but that's not a thing. And second of all, this is an interview process. Like, this seems like a non-factor for like to judge someone on their technical skills. At least for it's an interview. Like, how particular are you going to be?
So also something to mention is that this job was it was literally labeled a junior data engineering position. You did not have to have a lot of experience. And so I was like, okay, so clearly you want someone with more experience, and you're saying junior, but you want someone with more experience.
But that's the thing though, is like, even someone who's like 10 years into software engineering could just could use the pound sign. Like,
so, right. So one of the other things they had said to me was that I wrote an elaborate function that was going to scan over the file and then proceed to look for special, because it was like the data was littered with special characters. It had way too many special characters in a bunch of places. So I wrote an automated function that would say, okay, well, I've removed this special character. Is there another one? And I used nested, like a nested while and for loop. So it
Yeah.
was like while you still have identified, and they told you what special characters they wanted eliminated because it would create issues
Yeah.
in their database. So it was like, okay, well, while any of these special characters is present, proceed to go through and get rid of them. And they were frustrated because I didn't use a regular expression, which is a common way of looking for a pattern. I just used individual strings and identified each individual character. So basically, they had pointed to an inefficiency in my code. So it just felt very nitpicky for having accomplished and having solved the problem. And I wrote extensive documentation for it. And in my documentation, I had mentioned what my improvements could be. Since I was also going to school and they deliberately told you not to spend a lot of time on it. So I was like, okay, like I won't spend a lot of time on it, but if I were to make improvements, like here's at least one of them. And one of them was finding the file on your computer, like opening up a file window instead of just like hard coding the file path. And they also hit me for that. Even though I wrote in my documentation, I would do that if I had, like, I told you I was going to do it. I was just like not spending a lot of time on this, but like clearly it's in my mind. So it was a bit messy, but I think people shouldn't have to worry about any of that. So if you're worried, like that is not a standard problem. I even asked my professor in the boot camp, I was like, I'm kind of concerned. Like, I don't know if am I making big mistakes? Is the boot camp missing something? And he was like, he was like, everyone's going to do it a little differently. He was like, and I would tell you if they were being that nitpicky on you right away. He was like, they're kind of being pretentious, for lack of a better term. I don't think he used that word.
I didn't want to say that, but I'm glad your professor did. The whole regex thing, it actually is weird because usually companies test you on like, don't use a function, actually like use like loops and do this. Like, don't just straight up use a function. Because regex is like, it's fancy. It's pretentious. It's useful. Like you use it, you should use it. Like you will use it if you're doing day-to-day like coding and matching strings and looking for extracting strings, you will use regex. But like how you would do it, I feel like I use loops in my technical interview. I use for loops, while loops. So I feel like that's as important, if not more, to
I also use
for
loops and while loops in my
job. I feel like they were I mean, we know what they were.
But no one should I think they just wanted someone with like way more know-how, and like we could have had conversations about it. But realistically, for folks listening, not something you should worry about. Like, do what you know to do, and like it'll come out in the wash. You do not have to worry about that type of particular stuff.
So like you ended up getting that job, and obviously kind of just want to know generally whatever you want to say about what you're doing now.
Sure.
Yeah. What role you're in now, and what are some of the day-to-day skills that help you?
Yeah, I work in, so now I work as pretty much what I would say is a classic data engineering position. I'm sure that's relative, but I basically work with data sources of any kind. It could be CSVs, it could be extract files from MySQL servers. So it could be from like Microsoft SQL servers. And I will, depending on the need, so I'm kind of like a jack of all trades engineer in my company, like a consultant of a kind. I work with a bunch of different teams, and what we'll do is I'll be asked to develop an application of a kind, which is take the data from whatever its source is, and then manipulate it if need be, like combine it with other data sources the person needs, make sure, the data is coming out precisely how it needs to. And then I move that data through, typically like through AWS servers, to an endpoint like Tableau to do a visualization that will help someone make some kind of decision, or create optics on an aspect of our software systems that they need to see, like, oh, is something failing or something like that. So I'm basically like a standard like pipeline building data engineer, end to end from source to visualization.
Didn't you mention you were using Snowflake too?
Yes. So
cool.
To put that into perspective for the pipelines, like you have the source, you save the manipulated data to AWS. That's like what we do, and then
and then it comes into Snowflake, or
Yeah, and then we use
Yeah.
Snowflake to like make
Nice.
manipulations and store it someplace, and then you can use like, you know, you can use connections to like
Yeah.
Tableau can connect to Snowflake.
One last thing I wanted to ask you is, what are some of
Mhm.
the things that you considered, especially as like an entry level data engineer getting out of your bootcamp?
Culture is critical. You know, you really, and I think what I want to tell people is that like, don't just ask the basic question,
Yeah.
company culture, like what's your culture like? I think that is like a question anyone can answer. And everyone is going to say our company culture is good.
Yeah.
Ask questions about like think for yourself
Right.
about culture and what matters to you, and ask a question relevant to that without violating a boundary.
Yeah.
Because also in an interview, you can also kind of do yourself in if you're like, well, what if there's this like super specific scenario that takes place, and like how do you handle that, right? Like I think a manager could be put off if they're
Yeah.
going to be like, was that a situation you were in? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like they're gonna be worried about you.
Right.
So I think it's like be cordial, civil, and kind, but also ask a question that's like really important to you about culture. And maybe even ask a question where you can get some information and know implicitly whether or not it's the type of culture you want to be with. Like,
Yeah.
oh, you know, like, you know, do a lot of people end up working late some days? Like, do you find that there's a lot of work and like you guys bond over that, like, or something like that? Because then you also find out a lot of people are working late, which is probably not something you really want to
Yeah.
get involved in, you know? So
Right.
like figure some sort of shrewd way of getting the information
Yeah.
that you'd like to know about the culture without maybe being mean about it. I would say, there was one thing that really came to my mind. Culture is definitely super important. Oh, this for me is incredibly, incredibly important. Training. You
Mm.
know, like what is really like, how do you approach onboarding someone? You know, and where do you see them being in 6 months to a year from the day they start? And how do you see yourself as a manager involved in that process?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like really find out whether or not they're going to invest in you, and make sure they're available to you to answer questions when you have them, you know, because I think it can be really intimidating to answer questions or to ask questions because you're afraid of not knowing things when you first start a job, because you don't want to seem incompetent. That's at least like my imposter syndrome was like, you know, in past jobs I had, I was like, I don't know if I'm doing any of this right. And I'm terrified that I'm doing it wrong. So I
Yeah.
would say, you know, quell that by by asking questions. Like you've been
Yeah.
hired to, you know, you haven't been hired to know everything. You hopefully have been hired to like learn and
Right.
get onboarded. So figure that out, because I got really valuable insight into that when I talked about training with my now current boss. He had a really specific approach, and the way he thought about it, like even though I was intimidated, I put that feeling of intimidation aside
Yeah.
and was like, it sounds like he's invested though, and that's what I know I'll need. So I think training and culture are like pivotal, because you want to make sure you'll have a good relationship with your manager, and be able to grow in a culture that like you feel comfortable in. So
Yeah, that's actually a great point. That I think training and like, you know, you can learn as much as you can in a boot camp, but ultimately a lot of the stuff that you learn is on the job, and
yeah,
how that those skills are, you know, how they help you learn those skills and develop those skills, I think is super important.
the last thing I'll say about interviews is do your research on salary range.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us, depending on your identity, you know, you end up selling yourself short, and you end
Yeah.
up getting paid a lot less than you really should be.
Yeah.
And we know that's contributing to wealth gaps in the US.
Yeah.
So I think know your worth, but make sure if you're gonna ask for a specific range, you know why,
Yeah.
right? Like you can't walk up into an entry level role and be like, I want 200K. When like you know that's not when you're gonna be when you know that's not
Can
when
I
you're
get
gonna
half a
paid.
mil?
Yeah. So I think you know, being able to negotiate is really important. I negotiated my salary with techniques I never had the first time, and I ended up getting really close to what I had requested.
Awesome.
So just make sure that you do that for yourself. There are resources out there, network, and make sure you can get the know-how on the money you are owed for the position you're asking for.
And I'll definitely link like I think like Glassdoor is pretty good about this, levels. There's various ways to like, well, I figure out these, like, because there's a lot of like market bands and stuff now for these roles. Awesome. Well, this was I mean, I feel like this is a lot longer than we had planned, which I'm glad
Yeah,
for. So thank
too.
you for being our first podcast interviewee. And I feel like
Oh, I didn't know I was the first guest.
you're the first. Thank you so much for being on the show. And I feel like we've also started on such a high. Not that there aren't people like other people I have in mind that I want to interview, but like your story is so unique, and I really appreciated all the more important, like we can always talk about like how to get a job, what skills, it's not hard. It's not particularly hard to get that information. What's hard is to like hear your unique story, all the like the community work that you related to that ultimately, shaping your interest in whatever you're doing now.
I would also like we've talked about a lot of different topics.
We talked about so much. And I think the first half I'm glad we didn't talk about like Python and data.
I think sometimes the big picture is better. So I
feel like that's the stuff that ultimately everybody relates to. But cool.
If you ever decide to dive into other stuff, like particularly with like AI, like bias and stuff like that, like I would love to have deeper conversations about anything we've talked about. So happy to answer any questions and just sit and chat.
Hey everyone, if you enjoyed that video, please hit the like button. If you're new to the channel or want to keep seeing more content like this, hit subscribe. Unless you're a sponsor, in which case you should just contact me.